All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We're on to chapter 8, or we're on from chapter 8 into chapter 9. We'll be talking about the Industrial Revolution, and there's a lot of things that we got to talk about concerning the Industrial Revolution. And I'm going to do a little bit of talking. You don't have to write anything down necessarily right this second. I'll let you know when to write things down. But our lesson essential question is, how did the revolution change the way humans lived? Now, let me just tell you, the Industrial Revolution in your book says it's like 1700 to 1900. Okay? The main thing I'll tell you about the Industrial Revolution is that there is no certain date. Okay? And let's talk about the name. First, let's talk about the name Industrial Revolution. What is a revolution, or what does revolution mean? Revolution means great change, right? So what is the great change? Well, we'll talk about that. There was a great change in the way humans lived. Now, normally all year long, a lot of the revolutions that we've talked about have been like the American Revolution. We talked about the French Revolution. And those were about politics, and those were about, war and things like that. But the Industrial Revolution is a great change, revolutionary great change, but it really has to do with the way that humans lived. All right, so industrial means an industrial way to make things. All right, so here's what I want you to do. Whenever you hear the words industrial or Industrial Revolution, I want you to think factory. Okay, because the Industrial Revolution, during the Industrial Revolution, humans learned to make things in factories. Okay? And when you make things in factories, you can make more of them, you make them cheaper, and you make them better. All right? And that's what the Industrial Revolution was really all about. In a lot of ways, we still live in the Industrial Revolution. Okay. All right, so the Industrial Revolution is something that's hard to figure out a great place to start talking, because nobody woke up in 1700 and said, hey guys, let's have an Industrial Revolution. It's something that gradually happened over time. And there were so many different changes that it's just hard to find a specific place. But I like to talk about the Industrial Revolution and having it explaining how it changed human life and start at that point. Now, the real precursor to the Industrial Revolution was the Agricultural Revolution, or one of the agricultural revolutions. But the one that we'll talk about is an agricultural revolution that really kind of happened during the 1700s in Great Britain. Now, you can see Great Britain is a wonderful country right here, and this is where the Industrial Revolution started. This is where the Agricultural Revolution started. Now, when we say Agricultural Revolution, we mean a big change in agriculture. It was a big change in the way that crops were grown and animals were raised. All right, so one of the things we know from studying history is about human population and the relation to food. So who could tell me what happens to the human population when humans find better ways to grow food?
More of the population.
Yeah, sure. It increases more of the population. You get more people. It's really simple when you think about it. But during the 1700s in England, they learned there were new agricultural inventions and ways to do things, and it led to rapid population growth. So then the other thing you can think of is, as there was more food being made and more humans, there were also more machines that did agricultural work. When machines do work, humans don't have to do it. So generally, there was a long period of time where humans were needed less and less to do agricultural work. So, and it all started in England, Great Britain. They started moving to cities. Okay? Now, this is where the huge revolutionary part of this happened. Okay, so try to follow me on this. When people lived in the rural areas in England, in the countryside, they lived in small houses called cottages. So we're talking about the 98%. We're not talking about the nobility, the aristocracy, the kings and the queens. We're talking about the regular old people, sometimes known as commoners or peasants. Okay, those humans lived in small family units, in cottages, in houses in the rural areas. Now, over time, when their labor wasn't needed anymore, they didn't need to work as much because there was machines that did it, they moved to the city. So whole families moved to urban areas or cities. Okay, now, when they lived in the countryside, whole families did work together. Okay, so when they lived in the country, whole families went and worked in the field. Whole families went and worked in the agricultural stuff. It wasn't like, dad going out and doing the work, mom staying home, take care of the kids. That's not how life was. The whole family worked in the field. And at night, the whole family would make cloth. Okay, so the other main thing to talk about during the Industrial Revolution is the production of cloth, because clothing was industrialized during the Industrial Revolution. Before it was made in factories, people made cloth in their homes. Okay, so think back with me, and this is a huge change in the way humans live. So when they lived in the country, they all lived in a little cottage. They lived on some guy's land. They worked most of the time in his land, but a little bit of time on their own. They worked at agricultural things, and at night they made stuff like clothing. Okay, then when there was less and less agricultural need for workers and people moved to the city, the whole family moved to the city, but when it was time to go to work, the whole family went to work. Okay, so y'all know what factories are. You've probably seen pictures of factories or people making clothing in factories. When those factories first started in the mid-1700s in England, it would be whole families that went to work in a factory. Okay, so think about it. Whole families lived out in the country when they were out in the country, and they did all the work. They worked in the field, they worked in the house, they did the work together. Then when they moved to the city, whole families went and worked in the factories. Okay, and that was the way it was. Well, eventually, that changed. But the Industrial Revolution changed the way that people lived. Okay, it changed where they lived, how they lived, and things like that. So, and there's a lot of I have like 4 impacts up here. So there was what I guess I'm talking about right now is the impact on the family unit. There was a big impact on society because a huge population increased and people moved from the country to the city. What happened in the cities? The cities boomed. The cities got really big. They got really big, and there were problems involved in that. Okay, who can tell me what do you think happened? I know y'all haven't really gotten into the reading of this or anything, but what do you think happened when lots and lots of people started getting packed into cities all in a short period of time? Panic.
The crime rate went up.
Crime rate went up. Okay, why? Why did crime rate go up?
Because there was too many people.
Lots of people, small area. Do you think there was enough good quality housing for people? No, they lived in very poor conditions. What do you think? What else do you think? About working conditions. Do you think back then that
Very good.
they weren't? Yeah, the fact they weren't very good. What, Shay? There were not enough jobs. Now think about this. This is before like a lot of times of government regulation and things like that. So real quickly, you had a bunch of people packed into small areas in big urban areas looking for work because there was less and less work to be done in the country on the farms because of machines. They were packed into small areas. They had bad living conditions. They were looking for jobs because there was a small amount of jobs for the amount of workers. Do you think people got paid a lot of money? No, you're right. They didn't get paid a lot of money because there was a lot more workers than there were open jobs, okay? So when you have a whole lot of people for not very many jobs, those people aren't going to get paid very much. So this is before government regulation, the 1700s in England. Okay, so we'll talk about, and I'm just kind of giving this to you in brief, but we will talk about the poor living conditions, poor working conditions, the impact that had on city life, and it was very smelly too. It was very stinky to live in cities. There was no sewers in the 1700s. The sewer was the street. So So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about how that changed over time, because eventually, England, Great Britain made laws about that. And y'all know we have working laws today, right? Y'all, how many hours a week, if you're doing physical labor, how many hours a week is a normal work week? Y'all know this? 40? Yeah, normally 40-hour work week. Y'all have heard of the concept of a 40-hour week, right? You work 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. You get Saturday off, Sunday you go to church. That's kind of like our modern day. That's a product of how bad people were treated during the early part of the Industrial Revolution. It's got some stuff in there in your book about how bad about it was, but the average working day back in the mid-1700s was a 14-hour day, 6 days a week. Little kids would do it too, because remember I told you whole families went to work in factories. Okay, and then eventually the factory owners realized that you didn't need real strong men to do a lot of work. Once you had better machines in factories, little kids did the work. So you'll see pictures in your book on little kids working in factories and stuff, and that's not very good for kids, and they didn't have a lot of education, stuff like that. But another big impact was the class system. In the beginning of the year, we started talking about upper class, middle class, working class. So with this, people moving to cities and the growth of all this, there was a growth in the middle class. There was an increased brand new middle class. There was also like a new upper class, a new very wealthy class. Obviously it was small. And then there was a brand new urban working class. There had always been poor people lived in cities, but with this huge influx of humans, a new class, kind of a new urban class structure developed. And we really talk about this being a continuation of the growth of the middle class. Okay? And again, it all started in England or Great Britain. Okay, the Industrial Revolution started here and it spread south and east. Now, I'll also just show you this. For the most part, in the southern part of Europe and the eastern part of Europe, those were still mostly agricultural regions. They did not have industrialization as quick as the other areas did. Northern Italy, Switzerland, yes, industrialization. But in the south and the east, these were more agrarian areas. They did not industrialize very quickly. Okay? Again, when you hear industrial or industrial revolution, think what? Well, I tell you at the beginning of this. The revolution means great change. What does industrial mean? When you make something industrial, where do you make it? In factories, right? Okay. So you need to think factories, because it's just like this. Can I make one of these? I could, especially if I were Amish, right? Okay, because the Amish can make them. But it'd take me a long time, and it'd probably be pretty expensive. Now, that stool right there, I guess it was a gift for me, but you could probably pick it up at Target for, I don't know, about $35, $40. Okay? It was made in a factory over in Malaysia. Okay? Well, it's not China, but, kind of close. Yeah, it's over in that general area. So this is an industrial quality. Everything you see in here is made by industrialism. I could make that, but it'd be hard for me to make. There's a lot of things that we couldn't make at all without industrialization. Like this cell phone right here, okay? This cell phone, I couldn't make a cell phone, right? Varya, that's a nice cell phone you got there. All right, so I couldn't make a cell phone, so that's an industrial quality cell phone. All the desks you see in here were made 50 years ago in a factory someplace. They're still holding up nicely. All right, any questions on Industrial Revolution?